Hello, everyone. How's it going? I'm here with Antonio Galloni. He just did an incredible seminar on Vino Nobile de Montepulciano, and we're here in Miami. Antonio, you're the founder of Vinous, correct?
Yes, Sean, it's a pleasure to be with you, and really great to talk to your audience. We just wrapped up this seminar. There's a little bit of cleanup going on here, but it was great energy in the room. And yeah, great to be in Miami. Yeah, Vinous is a company that I founded with some close friends in 2013.
Yeah, awesome. And when you started Vinous in 2013, what made you think like this was the moment to start it for you? You came from Robert Parker before that, and before that, you weren't even in the wine business, or you were?
Well, I had a Piedmont newsletter for 2 years. Then I met Bob when I was in business school and worked for him for almost 7 years.
Yeah.
And, I always think long term, which, may or may not be the right thing to do, but it's the way I think of life. And so when I joined the Wine Advocate, part of the premise there was that Bob was looking for somebody who could take the business sort of to the next level when he retired. And so I joined there with the idea that one day, hopefully I could buy that business, or at least be in consideration to buy that business. And that worked for a number of years. And then at some point, Bob got to that point where he was going to sell the business. He made a different decision, which I respect. But that was kind of one of those moments where you just decide, well, I've got to go left or I've got to go right.
Yeah.
And it was really difficult, but it's like one of those moments where you know what you have to do, but you just wish it was easier.
It's tough. How did you build the trust of collectors and readers? Does that take a lot of time? I mean, you mentioned long-term vision. How was the start there?
I just think you go to the regions. Well, first of all, if I'm going to ask myself a question, I'm going to answer it. But if a young person were to ask me my advice, which I came to backwards. I can't say this was my divine inspiration, but if somebody was to ask me my advice today, somebody who wanted to write about wine, I think you specialize in a region and become an expert. Once you become an expert in one region and you're viewed as an expert by consumers, collectors, as you mentioned, people in the trade, then it's relatively easy to transfer your expert status to other areas. Okay. People will immediately give you credit for what you have accomplished in another area. Maybe not full credit, but enough of a door to be open for you to prove yourself somewhere new.
Yeah.
Whereas if you say, I want to taste everything, you're never going to be an expert on anything and you'll never really ascend. Now, to me, that just happened kind of on its own because I focused on the wines of Piedmont.
Why Piedmont, by the way?
Well, because I loved the wines. The wines that my dad introduced me to when I was a kid. I loved that region. I loved those wines. And so we started to write about them. I started to write about them for fun. And then other people I saw had an interest in my notes. And so,
that's where the following
came from. Yeah. And so this advice that I've just given, shared is just something that happened to me, very naturally, which is I started writing about the wines of Piedmont because I was a buyer of them, not as a trade buyer, but as a consumer, buying, drinking, writing about them, sharing my impressions on the internet, and then people finding some value to those. And I spent 3 years living in Italy in my previous career. So I had visited all the cellars and tasted with all the winemakers.
Learned Italian there too?
I learned Italian. I knew Italian before, but it got better for sure. But I came to it with a lot of consumer kind of knowledge, and I was just sharing it with other people. And this was at a time when there wasn't a lot of knowledge about the wines. There was certainly no social media or anything like that. So it was kind of also being in the right place at the right time. Yeah. But I got to be known as a person who knew a fair amount about Piedmont wines. And then what ended up happening is that whatever you want to call it, that level of authority was
got the attention of
Parker. But then later on, I was able to transfer that to other regions because I was already viewed as an expert in one thing. And that's why I'm suggesting that as a path. I didn't go into it knowing that. It just kind of happened that way. But when I look back, I think, God, I got pretty lucky, that I was able to sort of grow into these other areas where I knew less than I knew about Piedmont. And I'm convinced that that's just because when you're viewed as sort of belonging to a fairly upper tier level of professional, it's easier to go into other areas because you're transferring your credibility somewhere else as opposed to not having any credibility. So that's why if I were going to start over, I wouldn't change a thing.
You wouldn't change it.
Yeah,
it's not like the times changed how you do things now.
Be great at one thing.
Yeah.
And take the time. It's not easy. It doesn't happen overnight, but take the time to be really great at one thing. And then once you've made some progress, because you can only say it's progress, you can never say you're there, because it's not. We're all on a path.
Exactly.
You've never arrived. It's a journey. But once you've made some progress on that journey, then you can say, okay, I'd like to also taste, the wines of this region or the wines of that region. And then it can.
Yeah. And part of the way is like I made it, or I did really well, is we buy a lot of wines at auction for either collectors or for ourselves. And you see the AG there for Napa Valley. So you've moved that expertise to Napa, to other regions that you cover. But now you're part of a bigger team, right? Mm-hmm. Vinous, you have Joaquin Hidalgo in Argentina, Neil Martin in Bordeaux. When you hire critics for Vinous, what do you consider there? What's a big consideration for you?
Well, to me, it's really simple.
Like the expertise thing again?
Also, but I didn't go to college. I went to music school, mm-hmm. and I would read interviews with other musicians, and they would say things like, always try to play with people who are better than you. Always surround yourself with people who are better than you, because you can learn from those people. Maybe they're older, they're more experienced, they're more talented, they're at a different level, whatever it may be. So to me, it was always like, I just want to be surrounded by the best people. I want to hire the best people, and I want to create a company that where those people want to work. And which is why I didn't name the company after myself, because mm-hmm. I didn't think a really talented person, the really uber talented person, would want to work for something with somebody else's name on it. Yeah. I'm not sure if that's right or wrong, but it was a thought.
But the name, did that come up easily?
Just came some point, yeah. Okay. But I wanted the best people to want to work at Vinous. And so we've done everything we can to make that an environment that's welcoming. And I want to hire the very best people. I want to have Neil Martin for Bordeaux. I want to have Joaquin Hidalgo for Argentina and Chile. And now he's doing Spain as well. I want to have Anne Krabbeil writing about the wines of Germany and Austria, and Rebecca Gibb writing about New Zealand. They're both MWs. Exactly. We've got Eric Guido for Italy, the parts of Italy that I don't cover, and large parts of California, Washington, and Oregon. We have new critic Billy Norris, who's working alongside me in certain key regions. We have Alessandro Masnaghetti for the mapping project that we have, and it's just a question of wanting that, and then also looking for some younger people like Nicholas Greinacher, who we hired to do the Rhone, and then he's taken on some new regions as well. So just sort of thinking about also combination of the expertise, but also looking for newer voices. Yeah. You and I were talking before we went on the air about how hard it is to make a living in wine. And I really want to build a company that allows people to build a career. So it's a mix of mostly people with experience, but also younger people. And then there's, like Billy, I just mentioned before. I mean, he comes from the music business, but his background is very similar to mine, in that it sort of stems from being a consumer of wine. Exactly. And so those people, that kind of profile of person, often has a tremendous amount of passion. Yeah. And I want to capture that. Yeah.
So, it's what you talk about. We're very passionate about wine, the young people in this industry, but you can't pay rent with a bottle of wine, right? At the end of the day, you need to make it be able for people to enjoy it, but also, make a living out of it. Yeah. We talked about Vinous and the critics and the team that you build around people that you feel are better than what you can do. In terms of the consumers, we talked about your positive outlook, which I think is really refreshing. In headlines today, we see a lot of just negative headlines. Talk to me about what you spoke about in the seminar, where the type of people you're reaching out to and what you see for the future of wine.
I just think wine is a little bit difficult for some people to get, sort of just to enter into our world, so if I go to a restaurant like where I went last night with my son, you get a big long list of cocktails. They have exotic names. They are described in very flowery terms. You look around, they're presented in different glassware. Mm-hmm. Everything about them is appealing. They're beautiful. They look great. They sound great. And who wouldn't want to have a couple of those, right?
They make you want to drink everything on
Yeah, like you look at the menu, like, I'd love to try all these. Put me under the table, but I'd love to try all these. And then you look at a wine list, and it's just sort of like a name of an estate, possibly a region, and a price. And that's it. and some of these prices are up there because restaurant markups are now often four times, 3-4 times, and so the bottles have a certain price. And so, of course, that's a little bit difficult for people to access. It's not so easy. And there's also a difference between, let's say, a $20 or $25 cocktail. If you don't like it, it's not that much money. You know, if you order an expensive bottle of wine and you don't like it, that does hurt. So, you know, not everybody has the confidence to want to ask a sommelier for help. I mean, sometimes people feel very self-conscious about doing that.
Yeah.
So those things can create some barriers to what should be a very accessible beverage in terms of its compatibility with food, because no matter what anybody says, except for maybe perhaps a few cuisines, wine is a much better accompaniment for food than any of these cocktails, but it's just harder for people to access. So what we're thinking about always is, how do we make these wines, like the wines we tasted today, how do we make these more approachable to people and kind of remove those barriers? So I spend a lot of time traveling around the country speaking to younger consumers, and I see tremendous amount of interest. But people want to, they need to have less information in the sense of there's just too many wines out there, and it's sort of more focused. So we just finished this event in New York, you know, this weekend. It was all Italian wines.
Yeah.
It was a selection, you know, because you select the estates and then each estate brings 2 wines, more or less. And so it's some number, you know, 160, 170 wines, which is still an enormous amount for most people, but it's not 1,000 or several thousand. And even there, people come to our tasting and they'll ask me like, well, what should I not miss?
Yeah.
You know, because people just can only deal with a certain amount of information. And today there's so many regions making great wines. I mean, you mentioned Argentina before. You know, when I go to our own tastings and I taste the wines from Argentina, I'm just blown away by these wines. I'm like, wow, like that's great. That's great. I just keep walking down the line and I'm like, oh my God, every single wine I've tasted is really interesting.
There's a lot of good wine out there too.
Yeah. And like, how does an average person sort of figure out what they like and say, okay, I'm going to focus on this amount that's manageable bites of information. So that's a challenge. I mean, it's a good problem to have. It's much better to have too much choice than not enough choice.
Yeah.
But even in our own tastings, I see that people, what they're really looking for is a curated, smaller selection of things that they are going to enjoy.
That ends up turning over into purchasing. You had mentioned a woman who had gone to a tasting and ended up buying a case of wine the next time they were there. So it's all about, you know, giving them access to those wines.
Yeah. So in that case, because the other focus, as I mentioned in the seminar, we have 2 focuses. There's focus on younger consumers, so in their late 20s, early 30s. And then I think that women are largely underserved by our industry. And the example of yours, which is, I guess, an example of mine from our tasting last year, but earlier this year, is somebody goes to tasting, tastes a wine that they like, has a chance to chat with the winemaker, and then a few weeks later sends a picture of the wines that they bought. It's a very pricey California Chardonnay. And, you know, consumers don't buy wines by the case anymore. It's usually a few bottles of each thing. So for somebody to say, you know, I'm going to buy 12 bottles of this Chardonnay, you know, it's over $100 a bottle. I mean, that's a pretty big statement. And she has the purchasing power to buy much more than that, whether it's more wines from this same estate or several wines in that kind of quantity. And I just think that we succeeded in our tasting, in presenting her with a wine that she liked a great deal. And so what I'm thinking about is, how do I replicate this moment? How do I show her friends, her colleagues, several wines like that? And how can I do that then for even more people?
Yeah.
And I think that in this case,
you're doing a good job of that, because you said that sometimes your intimate, you know, high-end events that are like private dinners, you're seeing more and more female collectors showing up to these dinners.
Yes.
Before, you think of collector in your head, you just think of an old man with a big cellar and that's it, which is what it is. But you're seeing a shift happen before your eyes.
Yeah. So, I mean, what basically happened, Sean, is I got tired of going to events and it all just being guys.
Yeah.
Nothing against guys, but I think it's much more fun when there's a more diverse audience. And yes, in some of the tastings that we've done that are the more upper end, very sort of, you know, high level experiences where you don't have a lot of wine. So it's by definition something for a small group of people. And they're often wines that a lot of people have an interest in. So these are tastings or dinners that have a certain level of a certain price tag.
Yeah.
which is not accessible to everybody. And I started to see that women would come by themselves.
Yeah.
And they were really interested in wine. And first of all, they would come already very prepared. Super informed.
Yeah.
And then they'd ask me technical questions for like 3 hours straight. To the point, at one point I was like, I need to make sure that I'm like really prepared just in case.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I started spending even more time like preparing for these dinners. But
asked Antonio Galloni this question. He didn't know the answer.
It's all about farming and wine. I mean, it's a wonderful thing when somebody has a deep interest in farming and winemaking and approaches and philosophies. I think it's great, but I do see more of that. And so it's encouraging to me, and it does reinforce my view that women consumers who are interested in wine are out there, and that our industry as a whole in general has to do a better job of addressing that consumer and providing guidance. Women have different are very, men are, I mean, I know that these are stereotypes and somebody's going to be really offended, but sorry.
It's okay. We offend anyone.
What I've noticed is that, men are a little bit sometimes more simplistic about some things, and also maybe interested more in the numerical scores of wines and things like that. And women tend to ask often questions that are more contextual, like what order would I serve these wines in at home if I was having a dinner party?
Exactly.
Most guys would not ask that question. Again, no offense to anybody, and if I offended you, I'm sorry, but you would get these different kinds of questions, and it's just a different mindset with wine, and that just makes me think I have to direct things in a slightly I need to present things in a slightly different way, because I've got a different audience here, just as interested on the details. But
okay, you can say, that's all good. Yeah. Okay, it's all good.
Yeah. So anyway, we're gonna get kicked out of here pretty soon. But what I wanted to say was just a different audience with a different angle, different approach to wine, and that I needed to provide the answers to their questions, which are different from the conventional questions.
Exactly. And while we get this background taken off, I have one last question for you.
Yes, sir.
What is your dream wine that you have not tasted yet? Give me it can be an older wine or wine you haven't tasted yet. What's something you just are dying to taste? And you get to taste a lot of wine. So
I get to taste a lot of wine, but I'll tell you what excites me the most is not some older rare wine or something that I've read about it but never had. What excites me the most is a wine made by a young producer who's decided to go out on their own and make their own wine, whether it's in Champagne or Piedmont or somewhere in California. So the wine that I'm most interested in tasting is the wine that hasn't been made yet, maybe by somebody who's watching this and who's inspired to make their own wine because of, yes, I get to taste a lot of great wines, a lot of famous wines, a lot of expensive wines, blah, 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 blah. But the most exciting thing is when you taste something made by a young person who's pursuing their passion and their dream, not just because of what that wine is, but because I think it's also inspiring from a life point of view to watch somebody else pursue their passion.
Yeah, exactly. And one of my questions was why is wine so important in general? Why is it important? And I think that answer kind of answers that as well, of why it's an important product for all of us to taste and to learn about. Antonio.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you so much for your time.
We'll do a part 2 when we're not tearing down an event.
Absolutely. Thanks,
This is real and unedited. So thanks for watching.